This is episode 9, I think. Yes, 9 of my podcast, Let Me Go on a Tangent, where we talk about films and cartoons, mainly from my childhood, apparently, from my nostalgia. And today I want to talk about my absolute favorite of them all, which is High Praise, but maybe it's not my favorite as much as the one that I say is my favorite on every icebreaker form that we get every time you have a new class. And I haven't done that recently in college because we're all adults and can just speak to each other if we want to make small talk. But with that said, I want to talk about DreamWorks' Rise of the Guardians. Came out in 2012. I just checked and I'm correct. I am always right. And it is just something very special to me. And there's a cult following for it. It's one of those movies that it didn't succeed like crazy well at the box office. I think it's because stuff like that, it's released at the same time as other bigger projects from bigger studios. So it really was like set up to fail. There was going to be a sequel, and I'm still holding out for one, fingers crossed, but it was released at the same time as, I think, maybe Despicable Me. I think Despicable Me actually is the same time as Megamind, which is another film that has a really cult following. If you ever notice a big spike in one movie, you'll often find the underdog that was released at around the same time, which often, more than not, has a cult following, which is Megamind, The Road to El Dorado, Rise of the Guardians, Treasure Planet, Journey to Atlantis. What am I forgetting? There's like 2 more. Seven Seas, Sinbad, the Seven Seas. And then there's one more. I'm not sure. But, in that genre of film, this one is very special. It's 3D animated, and I think it holds up pretty well, especially the stuff with one character in particular whose anatomy is very... 2 of them, actually, but one in particular stands out more, that his anatomy is very abstract, so it's difficult to animate in that way. But I think it holds up pretty well. So let me just go through a bit of the plot just to introduce you. So basically, the premise is every myth from childhood is real. Like Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, the Sandman. They're all real, and they all protect children, and they all have this title of guardian. So they are instructed by the Man in the Moon to protect children around the globe that believe in them, and the children that believe in them give them their power. So their main prerogative is to bring joy and whimsy to children and protect them from growing threats like the boogeyman, which is the main villain or antagonist in this film. I say villain or antagonist because he's really not such a bad guy. Like, he's doing like messed up stuff. Like, if you frighten children, you're not that great of a guy. But he's a narrative foil to our protagonist, who is Jack Frost, and they have very similar motives and different ways of coping with the immense amount of trauma, the shitty hand that they've been dealt in this life as mythical beings. Is just like, you'd probably go crazy too if you were faced with the same type of bigotry, discrimination, just really hard, difficult life that they had. So the basic plot of the movie is that the boogeyman's coming back. He has a plan. He's gonna make bad things happen to children, and the guardians are gonna have to fight him. And the Man in the Moon says, I have the perfect guy to help you. And then our protagonist, Jack Frost, is supposed to become a guardian and find his character arc, and then he is helping children too. Right? Okay, cool. So that is the basic meat and potatoes of... I guess not meat and potatoes. The bare bones of the story. What you would read if you looked up it on Google, which I totally didn't do. I just know this. But I would like to start off by saying, and excuse my French, fuck Man in the Moon. I hate Man in the Moon. All my homies hate the Man in the Moon. And I'm sure, because this movie is based on books, like children's books, and it's really fucked up. What happens in those, it's like the lore runs deep, almost as deep as Five Nights at Freddy's lore. And the things that happen in there is like, it's Brothers Grimm levels of like, oh, this is a fairy tale, but it's the fairy tale told children to be like, don't go in the woods or you will be mauled to death by a wolf. That kind of fairy tale, not the, oh, true love's kissing, we all live happily ever ever bullshit. It's the macabre version of that. The movie is harkening back to that a little bit, but mostly it's like, it's the hero's journey, there's a happy ending, and we're all implied to have the happy ending. But like, to get there, our protagonist had to, I'm just gonna jump around and there's spoilers, so oops all spoilers, don't tell me anything. He had to die in order to become worthy, and then he also had to wait 300 more years to be useful. Because this is not any moral thing, okay? He didn't spend those 300 years training and like in preparation to become a guardian. He just spent those 300 years alone, ignored, and to be honest, put down by most of the guardians. Most of the guardians are dicks. Like, Sandman and Tooth Fairy are fine. They're chill. But like, borderline Santa and definitely the Easter Bunny suck. They're so mean. The Easter Bunny is like, oh, you ruined my one Easter like 30 years ago, so I have beef with you. Because he's all about spring and Jack Frost is all about winter, and winter is ugly and spring is beautiful, and I will. People always are like, winter is so bad, my seasonal depression gets so bad, it's so ugly and cold and moody and gloomy and gross. And that might be true. Your seasonal depression probably does get worse during the winter, but also, you're probably depressed year round. I am not diminishing anyone's struggle. However, keep in mind when you use that language, some people's seasonal depression gets worse during the summer. Did you know that? Because it's seasonal. And everyone's different. I think the winter is beautiful. And I think the concept that spring and warm things are good and only worth being called beautiful is wrong. I was gonna say it's a Western ideal, which probably is, but you know, I think across the board, practicality wise, warm stuff is better for growing stuff and like food, so it makes sense that people would make that association across the board. But like, in terms of beauty, right? Beauty can be found in all the seasons because it's nature. And nature you can find in nature misery and beauty both in abundance, equally. To call one thing or the other is inherently false. It creates a false dichotomy of beauty standards for things that aren't even animate and don't even apply to our human standards of beauty. It's the same thing I was talking about in one of these episodes. It's you're applying human logic and standards to something that isn't human, which is it's like it's playing God almost when you do that on a very small scale. But still, it's like you have no business trying to pass judgment on anything. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, Easter Bunny's a dick, and he remains one most of the movie. But of course, it's a family film, so we must have character growth and relationship development. Mm, but yeah, Jack Frost was Jack something. His last name is important. What's important is that the way that he was deemed worthy to be a guardian, eventually, was that he died for his sister. And he was in like medieval times at this time, so it's easy to infer that like they probably don't have a lot of food and like they're probably poor because of the way they dress. It's very plain, and they live in the woods. So it's like he's lifting their spirits with joy and like mirth, and through that he is helping the people around him and his little sister who needs that levity in her life. And then he died saving her from the ice, which is why he's Jack Frost. They were skating on a lake that was frozen. Then the ice cracked, and instead of her falling in, he sacrificed himself. And then he died. He's a child, and he died for his sister. And he saw the man in the moon, and the man in the moon resurrected him right away. And actually, it's not clear how much time passed between him dying and him being resurrected, because if it was right after, that carries the implication that he was so close to where his family was, and he didn't remember them and couldn't, so then he didn't remember them and thus could not find them, but he could have been with them. That's the bastardization of it all, is that he could have been with them, but the man in the moon took his memories. But regardless of taking his memories on purpose, or if the resurrection process just naturally does that, either way, you chose to resurrect a child and didn't give him any guidance, so fuck you. Basically. And like he's a teenager, but that's a child. That is a child you left alone for 300 years, and he has a mindset of the child, and it is disgusting that you left him alone until he was useful to you. 300 years later. Fuck you. Fuck you, Mim. Fuck you, Mim, and fuck you. All my homies hate Mim. You can't see me, but I'm holding up 2 middle fingers to the room that I'm recording in. Fuck you, Mim. And no, I'm not gonna bleep that out. I'm an adult. I pay taxes. I'm an adult. I swear I want to. Hope no actual authority. Like, I'm not gonna write this down like a reference. Don't listen to this. There's probably some smart things here, but there's also a lot of shenanigans. And I don't know if I would get hired for that. I'll write it down as in like I did it on my resume, but not in a like a, hey, come check this out. I won't do that. I'm getting off topic. What was I? Oh yeah. So there's also a little side plot that comes full circle and saves the day in the climax of the film, where he plays with the same group of kids. Obviously, here's a mechanic in the world that's part of the magic system, is that if kids or if a human doesn't believe in you, they can't see you. So Jack Frost is not believed in. It's like he's not real. But if children are like Santa, they believe Santa's real, they can see him if he walks in the room. So that's how mythical creatures work in this universe. So he's playing with them, like he's messing with them, like he's a little mischievous little boy, but they can't see him. And then shenanigans, but it's this fun group of kids where we don't learn much about, but they have a lot of character and personality, so you don't feel the need to know everything about them. But yeah, they come back later in the climax of the film, and like they save everyone by still believing, because the boogeyman's plan was to like create a bunch of nightmares and misery, because his power is to create nightmares. I'll talk about the character designs in a second, because I do want to talk about that, because that was part of the animation thing, but in relation to the actual magic system, computer stop. So he creates nightmares to make all the children of the world miserable and not have joy and not believe in the Guardians anymore. And when no one believes in the Guardians anymore, they kind of lose power until they kind of like fizzle out. Because I think they're like more like ideas and concepts than things that can be killed. So they don't die; they just become very weak and unable to fight back. And the climax of the scene of the movie is that Jack Frost finds his center, his fulfillment, his reason for being is making people happy, making children happy, being a little trickster and achieving that through that. And the kids are like, I still believe in you. And then that gives them strength. And then Sandman comes back and it's this whole thing, and then they win. And I forget where I started talking about this. Yeah, there's a fun little. I started talking about this because it comes full circle, and then we meet Jamie, which is the main kid that we focus on. He's the conduit through which we have the B plot. I don't know, but the thematic through line of the children. So yeah, that's like our vantage point, I guess. And then that all happens. So that's fine. You have the broad strokes of the story, right? Yeah. Okay. Now I want to talk about character design real quick, and then maybe talk shit more about the other characters, and then some stuff about like some meta stuff about the creators, because there is some stuff. I won't talk about all of it, but I have a few things on my mind. So, when I say character designs, what do I mean? Well, what I mean is how each character is, one, dressed, two, their anatomy, and three, how that ties in with the overall theme or idea that they represent. And bonus, four, how they're animated. I can't tell you any technical terms because obviously I didn't work on it, but I can say that it's really pretty. I can tell you how it looks like and how it compares. So first of all, I want to say that like the strongest one that I was talking about earlier that I was referencing is Sandman's design and the Boogeyman's design, which the Boogeyman is called Pitch Black. Sandman is just called Sandy. Sandy's design, he's a Sandman, makes you sleepy. He's made of sand. He's made of golden sand that he controls to give children good dreams. And he makes a bunch of stuff out of the sand. He's also mute, which is interesting. He speaks using pictographs with his sand that he makes, like all the other stuff. I think that's just referencing to how he is, like, sleeping is silent, maybe? Or that, you know, the imagery of a dream is so much more vivid than anything you could come up with, so there's no use in talking, I guess. He also has narcolepsy. I don't think that in mythical terms that would be what you would call it. But if you were to make a human version, he'd have narcolepsy because he regularly falls asleep when, like, stuff is happening. Because he's the Sandman. The way that he's animated is so interesting because I watched a documentary about it, and as opposed to Pitch Black's design, which is very similar with the sand, and it's because like he creates nightmares. It's a similar trick, but like warped, of Sandy's gift. So Pitch Black's is supposed to be like tar, like his sand is tar-like when he uses his power to create nightmares, create shapes, and then Sandman's is more velvety. It's a softer texture. And you'd think that you could just use the same technique, but they move in very distinct ways, even though it's obviously the same, like, genre of power. It's the same idea, but it's so fascinating the way that they talk about it. Yeah, I'm sure they said it in an interview somewhere. You could find it if you really want to. But yeah, that I just find that so fascinating, the work you put into, especially in a 3D case, the textures, how the light hits it, how it moves, how it reacts to environmental things is just so fascinating. They have a similar thing with the Tooth Fairy, which, okay, to talk a little about the Tooth Fairy now. She. Okay, so this is where I gotta talk about the creators a little bit. Because the author of the original book that Toothiana is from, which is her name, in her previous life when she was human, she was an. Okay, so this is a fantasy land in the book, but it's very obviously referencing Indian culture. And she was a warrior and a leader. That's the like brass tacks of it. But it was a nonsense land. There's this whole it's a whole thing with like how the Western media production scene views the East, and that whole thing with like quote unquote Orientalism as like a concept, very outdated because it implies that all Asian cultures are a monolith, which they are not. They're all very distinct, and they're all very beautiful. And if you think that they're a monolith, I encourage you to educate yourself because they all have. Because Eastern cultures are all so old, especially Asian cultures. They're all like so old and rich, and like the West, like America has been around what 200 years. That's pennies compared to like, for example, Japan. In comparison to China, in comparison to India, in comparison, like there is no competition. Yet we, as an offshoot of colonialism and capitalism, create the narrative that they're beneath us. Not to say that Japan didn't colonialize other things. I'm not trying to create a moralistic question here. I'm just saying that Eastern cultures are not a monolith, and that's kind of what Orientalism implies. So that was weird. The way that he wrote it, it was weird. But in the movie, which is what we're talking about, in the movie it's much more broad. Like her home is obviously based off the Taj Mahal, and she uses a sword, I think maybe once. I don't know if she ever has a weapon, actually. Cowards. But she is a very skilled swordsman in the book, and I don't think she really does anything in the movie. But her character design, finally, her character design is she's a hummingbird humanoid who flies, because she's a little fairy. Has feathers all over her body with like back feathers to imply a cape. And she has a bunch of little assistants that look just like her, but like really tiny. If you've seen Centaur World, it's basically that, but they're competent and can't speak. That's gonna be such a hard, like, deep cut because no one the Venn diagram of things that I talk about and the people who will know all of what I'm talking about is like me and two other people, and that's it. So I encourage you to educate yourself. But yeah, it's a really fun design. It would have been easy enough to just fully make her Indian because Jack is from a real culture implied, like he was from a real place on Earth. So it very easily could have just been like, oh yeah, she was in the same boat. Because Santa Claus is also a very obviously human person who just now has powers and a workshop. Santa is it's sort of like Klaus 2019. Go watch it. If you want a new Christmas movie, go watch Klaus on Netflix, okay? You'll thank me. But it's sort of like that, where he's a big burly Russian man and has It's just great. He's just very great. I have nothing to say about him. Flawless character design. A little oblivious, but in a fun way. I don't think it's responsible to say it's fun when men are oblivious. But I digress. That's besides the point. What was my point? The point is that the way that Tuthiana is animated, her feathers all have to, like, 5 of them have to be in a program, and then the next 5 have to be in a separate program. And, like, there's something about with having so many things with individual textures so close together and move in tandem that just took so much, like, firepower that it was like a ridiculous number where they used so many different things to be able to achieve the effect that they did. And it really pulled off because it's the way that she moves is very much like a hummingbird. And it's fun when the anatomy of a character influences their behavior. I just think that's a really fun, like, it's a fun character beat, and it's a fun thing that they could be doing to make it more interesting to look at instead of just having it be talking heads. That's a term I learned in acting class. Status. Here's another one. And then, who haven't I checked off? Jack Frost, as I said, he has a cane and a cute blue hoodie with frost on it. Don't know where he got that. I have questions. But, yeah, and he doesn't wear shoes. So that kind of hurts my heart a little bit. Like, when he's offered them, I mean, granted, they're a sign of a job that he doesn't think that he wants. And, like, it's very presumptuous at the way they're offered, but when he's offered them, nonetheless, he rejects them. So it's like, okay, this is his choice. He could have shoes. But just the imagery of a child that's cold and doesn't have shoes is very heartbreaking, especially when you are reminded that this child is actually 3,300 years old and has been alone for that whole time. And when he hasn't been alone, he's been rebuked for companionship because he's seen as a trickster in the mythical being community. Which haven't all of you been known as tricksters at some point? It feels very one-sided. But whatever, that's his character design. It's very simple. He has white hair too. It changed when he died from brown to white because it's ice. And his eyes also changed from brown to blue. It is like, it's cold. It's cold colors. He's Jack Frost. It all makes sense. It's coherent. It's fine. It's simple. And then the last one is the Easter Bunny. I could talk for 3 hours about the Easter Bunny, but my throat is dry. He's a giant Australian bunny, voiced by Hugh Jackman. I don't have any more information than that. He's just really cool when he's not being rude or, like, accusatory or pathetic. But, like, all the rest of the time he's pretty cool. He fights with kangaroos. He fights with boomerangs. That's what it's called. He fights with boomerangs, and he has tribal tattoos, which, again, a little iffy. Don't use tribe tattoos if you're not from that tribe or you don't know what they mean. It's almost weirder when they just look like tribal tattoos and they don't actually mean anything. That's still weird. Don't use a part of someone else's culture if you don't understand or respect it just because you think it looks cool or exotic. That's colonialist ideology. Colonialist ideology. I know how to enunciate. But yeah, it's fucking weird. Don't do that. Stay in your goddamn lane, okay? Fucking weirdo. In the books, it's even weirder, but not, like, insensitively so. We get the origin of E. Aster Bunnymund, which is his name, guys. His name is Easter Bunny. Easter Bunnymund. E. Aster Bunnymund. And his origin is that he's an alien that just so happens to look like a bunny. And he's really much more nerdy in the book, too, like his design. But if he eats chocolate, like, he makes chocolate, but if he eats chocolate, he goes apeshit and grows 100 arms with swords. I don't have any more explanation than that. Could you just be cool with it? But yeah, that's all the character designs. And the last thing I think I want to talk about is the foil. The narrative foil of Pitch and Jack. Because I also referenced that earlier. Jack wants to be seen. He wants companionship. He wants to be believed in. Who doesn't? But Pitch also wants to be believed in. The only problem with that is that he looks scary. And he gives nightmares. And he wants to be feared instead of seen. Which is not what Jack wants. But honestly, I think if they just gave him a redemption arc and, like, friends, Pitch Black wouldn't be such a big deal. Because it's good to be scared sometimes. It's a natural response for a reason. It's useful. To say that no child should ever be scared ever is like saying they shouldn't understand that if they trip on the sidewalk, they might skin their knee. Or if they walk into traffic, they're going to get hit by a car. Like, that's not safe. And that's not useful. That's not helpful to the child's growth. If you heard that, that was water. So it feels, on a meta level, it feels unfair that he's being punished for it, but also you can't go around doing this to children, so... pros and cons. But the foil part is that they want the same thing, but in different ways, and they're being perceived differently, so only one of them gets to achieve their goal. Because in the end of the movie, Jack becomes a guardian. Which... I don't know how that works, because at the end of the movie, we have this main group of children, as previously mentioned, that all believe in him. But, like, how are you gonna... I guess you get, like, a trial period if you're a new guardian, where you don't have to have, like, the entire world believe in you to, like, not die. But, yeah, I always question that, is, like, isn't he gonna be, like, really weak, because not a lot of people believe in him? But whatever, it's framed as a happy ending, and I always just really liked it. It's very cozy today to watch it. I watch it during Christmas time, usually, or just whenever, but, you know, in the later half of the year when it's cold, it's nice to get some hot cocoa and put this on because it's mostly wintry. Obviously, Jack Frost, it's that aesthetic. But it's also just very cozy of film. Just high stakes, though. High stakes. A lot of stuff happens. It was also sort of one of my first venues into, like, fandom spaces. Like I said, there's a cult following, and you can find it. Oh, can you find it? And it was a gateway drug to fandoms for me. Which is a good thing, because I've learned a lot. There's a lot of internet culture and, like, real culture. It's a melting pot on the internet. For good or for bad, just like in real life. But there's a lot to be learned if you let yourself learn it. And, you know, I'm thankful for that. People often forget that the internet is a learning tool. At the end of the day, like, it's for entertainment as well, but who's to say you can't learn something from entertainment? You know? Who's to say you can't learn something from entertainment? But I think that's it. I just wanted to gush about it a little bit, and I really do think that the animation still holds up today. Because it does the most with what it can do, and it doesn't try to do more than that. I think that's where it succeeds, because a lot of projects will bite off more than it can chew, and then it looks shitty 2 years later. But when you do what you can competently, that's much more compelling. And as you could probably tell, there's some things with the story that I don't agree with conceptually on a meta level, but that's the meta level, and that can be discussed, and that's also a fun part of watching movies. As a movie itself, as you're viewing it, perfectly serviceable. It is a family film. It's a lot of fun. It has great themes and messages. And I think that'll do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. I think next week Next week is Thanksgiving, so I don't think I'll have to do an episode that week, but the week after that, maybe. Yeah. The week after that will be the last episode. So I don't know what I'm going to talk about. Maybe I'll make a list of the stuff that I wanted to talk about and then didn't get to, and then I'll end it with whatever I'm watching currently. Usually how it goes. Um, we'll see. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Pacific Tiger Broadcasting. Bye.